Welcome to one more. They cannot keep their mouth shut. Number 5. I don't know which number will stop until I find more people in the Bible uh, that could not stop talking. Truth, I'll keep talking also. Yes. And today I'll bring to you Joseph. You hear a lot about the nation of Israel. Yes, they are descendants of a family, Jacob. Yes, and Jacob had 12 sons, and the youngest actually was Benjamin after Joseph. But Joseph, at the time things happened with significance, he was the youngest, and he was a very special man, yeah, because he held very firmly who God is and what God wanted from his life. He did not compromise, and he had very little, information about God, because today we have the Bible, we have more records, we have the words of Jesus, no? The Messiah of God. But Joseph didn't have that words of Jesus. Yes, he came to exist much earlier than Jesus. So what he had in his heart was enough to go through the hardest rejections and betrayals and do still his best without going deeper in sin. So I'm gonna read for you why his family hated him. Family, I say, was the brothers. Yes, the brothers. He was a man of good news. Yes, because the Spirit of God was with him. He had that sense that everything he sees is not actually the real thing. All this decay, all this greed, persuasion for a better world, but based on their own selfish gain, that was not in the mind of Joseph. Joseph was content of whatever came to his hand, and he was always ready to help, to serve with good heart, not charging anything. So that was his character. But that envied their brothers, because their brothers didn't have the same thing in the heart. They were always wanted to be seen good by his father. Yes, their father had that jealousy. Okay? We can't trust in family to conquer the highest love. The highest love comes from God to us. And then if God did not exist, then it's bad news. It's really bad news, because we are not really loved, okay? If you are a man or a woman, if you didn't have that good job, if you didn't have that good position or that good something you have, would your family stick with you? Would they love you in hard times, or they would just criticize you and put you down and say you're not worthy? Yes, or try to compare you with other people. So it's very hard to find love. Yeah. So in Genesis 37, I'll read some verses for you, so you can, if you want to read the whole life of Joseph, it's Genesis 37, 30, 38, 40, 41. Okay? But I picked some verses, keys, verses, for you to understand why the jealousy, why the hardship he got. Okay, in the verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other brothers, other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. 5 now. Joseph had a dream, and when he told to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out of the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brother said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Joseph did not have, along the story, you can feel that he did not have that, he didn't want to appear as more special or greater than anybody else. You're gonna see that when he was in hardship, because when we are in hardship, actually we could have an excuse to try something, to come out of that situation, but that takes to step on the head of somebody. Yes, and Joseph did not do that. So if he hasn't done that in the hard times, when he was in the good times with his family, he didn't have either. Yes. In the verse 9, then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Now see, he can keep his mouth shut. Listen, he said, I had another dream. And this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father, as well as his brothers, his fathers rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to ground before you? Now Genesis, I didn't put the other verse here. Verse 11. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. He kept the matter in mind because he knew Joseph's heart. And if God was the one giving that dream to him, maybe he's just foretelling what is about to happen. Yeah? Now the verse, Genesis 37, 18 to 20. Now it comes. When they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. That became the goal of life of the jealous, yes, the goal of life, because when a non-believer is around a believer, okay, they can sense God's spirit, they can. And when that happens, their spirit becomes very jealous, and it is their goal to end that moment, to end that circumstance, because that actually becomes a torment to them. If they don't want to come to light, if they don't want to also welcome God in their lives. Okay, and then in the verse 19, and they said one to another, behold, this dreamer comes. How many times you that don't trust God say, the fanatic is coming around, let's slay her. Doesn't happen. On the 20th, come now therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast had devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. When they do all these things, lies has to be there. Okay? Lies has to be there and all other kind of dark schemes. Now 37 verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of the Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So they put him in a pit, but they didn't kill him. They sold him as a slave to the Midianites. And the Midianites sold him also as a slave to Egypt, no? Trying to make some profit. Now in the verse 34, in the chapter 34, it's a very important chapter because Joseph was in a very bad situation. Yes, there was no hope when you're sold as a slave. You're there just to be a slave, nothing else. There's no hope, no perspective, no second page. But Joseph, because he had God's Spirit with him, he had encouragement from inside out. Nothing he could hear around him was positive. Nobody in that land knew God. He was completely alone with the Lord. Completely alone. There's nobody that would come to him and say, oh, trust God. Or read the Psalms. The words of Jesus. Try to encourage him in some way. There was nothing. But Joseph had a good attitude in every circumstance. So in this chapter it says, the verse 2 of 39, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. How he can prosper as a slave, yes. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, see, the master, Pharaoh, were pagan, okay? They didn't know God either. But it doesn't matter if you're pagan, if you're not. You can sense something's different about that person that walks with God. Something's different, and you can feel it. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes, and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the households of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was a well-built and handsome. Every believer is handsome and hot. There is no ugly believer, okay? And after a while, his master's wife, took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." He refused. Now, in today's world, you are a slave. It means you don't have a salary, okay? It means you just have to work. And you have an opportunity to feed the flesh. Yes, feed the flesh inside, nobody knows, and still having authority, somehow good life in the house of my supervisor. Because Potiphar was like a supervisor, okay? He was not Pharaoh. And she tempted him. For those who can't keep their mouth shut, sometimes the times become so hard and so heavy that is the time we are vulnerable. Yes, vulnerable because it seems like nothing good will ever happen again. So then temptations start coming. If you just do this, you can have a little thing. If you just do that, you can have a little comfort. Yes? And with him was not different. Okay, in the verse 8, but he refused. He said, "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Today is not different. You know, Joseph had that Spirit of God with him that would tell him that is wrong. Okay? And it's a foolish thing, not only in that time, in the head of Potiphar's wife, but today would be called a fool. Just sleep with her, feed yourself. Who is God? Why you have to have respect for someone you cannot see? Instead of this real life here, you need a place to stay, you need a food to eat, and you can have some enjoyment. Well, today is not different, yeah? The verse 11. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. All that story led him to prison, okay? To prison, it was for a long time. In the verse 19 it says, when his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. He burned with anger, not because he thought bad about Joseph. He knew Joseph. He knew that his wife was after him. But instead of punishing her, again, zeal of reputation, zeal of the name, cover up the truth and let the innocent perish. Okay? If Potiphar knew that he was truly the guilty one, he could have killed him. Yes, but he didn't kill him. He put him somewhere else. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison. the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, verse 21 now, the Lord was still with him. Was with him, he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. There is a hunger very much to trust somebody these days, to trust someone. And as corruption invades everything and that sense of survival, it's very difficult to find a trustworthy person. But because Joseph feared God, they could trust Joseph. Yes, and they saw that, and they didn't even know God, okay? But they felt like, well, this guy is faithful with the little. He's faithful with the much too. That's actually a word of Jesus. He said that. Now, Pharaoh, it came a day after years. And Joseph was a hard-working man in prison. Volunteered to do many things with excellency as if he received a salary. Does the world has that? No. Not even if you receive a great reward, a great salary, you are willing to do your job with excellency. No. Because sometimes you can't see the purpose of doing it. It's just that you get paid. That's it. That's a very little thing to invest life in. Yes. But Joseph knew that somehow, someday, something great would happen. So he was called a dreamer because he believed in good news. He believed in the justice of God. He believed that there was something more precious than whatever circumstance he would be in. Yeah. Now in Genesis 41, 15 to 16, says this. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret. But I have heard it and said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret. Pharaoh was a pagan man, and of course he had people with called to divinations or try to guess things, and wisers of the land. Today, the wisers of every land is psychologists. They consult psychologists for every step. Psychology, okay, it's a science born in those lands. Egypt, Persia, Greece, that carries a sense of their own wisdom and try to guess what the mind of people are. Okay? Has nothing to do with the wisdom of God. But instead of going to God, they go to them. Today is the psychologists. In that time was the wisers of the land. People that come sometimes with a bright idea. But they could not do and answer what God gave to Pharaoh. It was a dream. It was a dream, and only Joseph could interpret that dream, because he interpreted two other dreams in prison to two people that were prisoners also. And that came to happen. when he interpreted the dream, the interpretation came to happen. That's how they believed, and then they passed on the rumor to Pharaoh. So he invited him to the palace. All of a sudden, God's timing, yes? Then Joseph, humbled, said, I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God, it's his name that has to be elevated. We are nothing. You know, the people that accept God and the people that doesn't, they are both equal, actually, in value. They are. What makes somebody valuable? It is if the Spirit of God is there, okay? Otherwise, it becomes all the same. All the same. I've been to recently do some works for municipality, and we are emptying a house of a dead person. From the things left behind, I can see that that person didn't have the Lord. It was marks of suffering you can find in the clothes, in the belongings, yes, that hunger for things. But why I say that, the house is very yellow of smoke and a lot of alcohol in the house. That's a sign of trying to escape of reality, yes. So, but going back to Joseph here. He elevated God's name in front of Pharaoh. He was not ashamed, okay? He said, but God. He was not afraid that Pharaoh would tell him off and say, what? I tell you here to come and give you a chance to say what you can do, and you come with the name God? You come with religion. So he took a risk, but told the truth. He didn't keep his mouth shut. He said, if I come with something significant to you, with something profitable for you, comes from God, not from me. Okay? But God will give you, Pharaoh, the answer he desires. Well, Pharaoh was having a desperate heart, and he surrendered to tell the dream to Joseph, okay? Because after Joseph said the name God, he could have just sent him back to prison. But no, he did not deny until the end, okay? Now the last, you're tired to hear me, yes? I can feel it from here. Genesis 41. It says, when he translated the dream, Pharaoh said to Joseph like this, in Genesis 41:39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no so discerning as wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne I'll be greater than you. Joseph in charge of Egypt. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen. Now you understand this dress, yes. Something good. Something bad, I put it off. Something good is inside. Okay, go back here. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot at his second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way." Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Now he was above even Potiphar. Okay? Potiphar, the guy, he put him in prison. That was the supervisor. Yeah? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I'm Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift a hand or foot in all Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name of Paneah, and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, gave him a wife also, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Now, it's just my opinion, okay? I think that woman Pharaoh gave to Joseph was even more prettier than Potiphar's wife. I believe that, okay? So he gained. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. That was one of the dreams. 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields around it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea, and it was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It's because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim. He said, "It's because God had made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Everything Joseph, he was faithful in spirit, in much and in little. And instead of going back and humiliate his brothers, yes, he dedicated everything God gave him back to God. See, he put the names of his sons to honor the one who gave him, the one, and even though he spent so many years paying for something he didn't do. Yeah? Now the verse 55 and 56. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. Even though Pharaoh had the sense that Joseph had the answers, that was enough for the Pharaoh. But that was not wise. Because if he saw that the Spirit of God was with Joseph, why, as king, as Pharaoh, he didn't try to get the same. He didn't try to get the same. He kept his old ways. He kept his old gods. Okay? But then why God blessed the land? Even though he did not bow to Joseph's God. To see Joseph prospering, it's a mark. It is a mark. And that is the message. Yeah. You can even give a favor to a believer, but still keep your old ways. Giving a favor to the believer will not save you. Will not save you. Because what made Joseph to prosper, it's the same God that can make you prosper. Somebody's just a king or a pharaoh because God allowed it. Yes. And you're gonna respond to God what you did, what you didn't do as king. If you are a leader of something, you have more responsibility than the others to answer to him. Because he entrusted to you people. He entrusted to you a land. He trusted to you big things. So it's wise to have the Lord as the counselor, to have the Lord as the wisdom. Yes. So that's the message today. Joseph had troubles, biggest troubles in his life, because he was a genuine messenger. He was just having a good spirit in hard times, harming nobody, stealing from nobody, wishing to have what other people have. And even though he had very, very vulnerable circumstances to do all these things, but God saw he didn't. Yes. Every believer are called to have the same hope as Joseph. Yes. Because we're gonna suffer jealousy, persecution, hard treats, and very hard trials, squeezing us from every side that you think a human being can live. A human being can live well today with what the human being needs. Food, place to stay, somebody to share moments, yes, such as spouse, yeah, something like this. But Joseph didn't have none of these things, and he's still prospering, and people were seeing that. So that the same spirit that guided Joseph in that time is the same spirit can guide us today. And the heart of people are not different. Just because we are in different generation, that doesn't mean things are. All that nations I put in the video at the start, they are speaking, trying to come with ideas for solutions, but not there to say the solution is the Lord. They are not there. Then they go in circle around and around and around and around, solve nothing, solve nothing. Instead of just sitting and hear what God has to say. God has the time to make all of them to see that He is the ruler. He is the king. And they have no value. Doesn't matter who's seated in those chairs. Ministers, kings, presidents. Do they have the Spirit of God with them? Pharaoh said this. Does anybody in the kingdom has the Spirit of God like this man? Somebody with the Spirit of God has solution for many things. Many things. Not because they are too smart. It's because they said, yes, God rule. God comes and tell me what to do. Yes. But a jealous world understand this different. They want the glory for themselves. They want to be seen as solution founders. That doesn't exist. Okay? So God bless you. And don't keep your mouth shut if you have the Spirit of God. Bye.